Okay, as I was saying, deadlines remain unchanged. So, exam 1, quizzes part 2. Deadline 5, October 19th. End of day, exam 2, quizzes part 3, November 16th. End of day, exam 3, exam 4, quizzes part 4, December 7th. Day that shall live in infamy. Exam 5, deadline December 13th. The final will cover all the things if you need it. And the deadline for that is 5 p.m. Just like the normal in-class final would be if it was in class. For the paper, draft deadline November 9th. You can do as many as you wish till either get the grades you wish or time comes to an end. +5 deadline November 14th, end of day on Blackboard. Emergency deadline November 21st, end of day on Blackboard. And desperation deadline December 8th, end of day on Blackboard. Although we missed class because of the storm, we missed class again on the 17th. I have a ILAC meeting, Institutional Level Effectiveness Committee, and hence I'll be there instead of here. Also, contact me through email. I have no power, I have no internet, and so very little sketchy phone service. So if you email me stuff outside of my office hours, I won't be able to reply. So if you don't hear back from me immediately, that's why. And I did a run around my neighborhood to see the condition, and it was exactly like it was on Thursday. There were still trees all through all the lines, and power and utility trucks driving through the area, but doing nothing because they have other stuff to do. Because they have a priority system. And so, well, I'll let you know when power is back, so that way I'll be able to reply to you. But on weekends and stuff, the power's still off then. You won't hear from me until I come on campus to do this stuff. Okay, before pressing on to our new stuff, any stuff about previous stuff, or how to build solar panels, which I've been doing. That needs more stuff. Okay, so last time looking at a good dead friend, David Hume, and we saw through the magic of the YouTubes, the problem of evil, and the gist of that basically was, to quickly recap it, is the problem of evil is that we see in the world around us all this evil, so how do we reconcile that to the God that's all good, all powerful, all knowing? And some options are to reject God being all good, reject God being all knowing, or reject God being all powerful. Now what Hume does in making his argument is basically an argument by example. He lays out how everything is so bad, and that, example, 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 example of things being bad. Then he concludes that there's evil, things are bad. And then he ties it into God by saying, if God is, all those great qualities, we'd expect there to be no evil, but there is, so problem. And he considers some stock replies to it. And his ultimate conclusion, though, is not atheism. He doesn't say, thus there is no God. He says, basically a skeptical reply. And at the end, he says, well, this doesn't decisively prove that God doesn't exist, but he says, perhaps sarcastically, perhaps seriously, that we need a whole new system of knowledge and logic to prove this. And some have taken him to be being sarcastic, saying, oh yeah, you need a whole new logic to do this, so no God. And others take him to be not being sarcastic, saying that you could do this provided you had a whole new system of logic and a new theory of knowledge. And unfortunately, they didn't have emojis back then, so I don't know whether he's smirking, smiling, or what he didn't say. Okay, now we press on to Hume and the immortality of the soul, dealing with the question of death. One philosophical question that has a definite answer, but unfortunately you have to die to find the answer. So kind of a mixed lesson there. Okay, so what does Hume do in here? Well, first, some preliminaries, or a preliminary. Hume is operating within a theory of substance. And back in the days when Hume was Huming, substance was pretty popular. People like Descartes and Locke embraced it. George Berkeley embraced it. And some people really liked it, like Descartes, who said, yeah, it's material substance, immaterial substance, good stuff. And others sort of reluctantly accepted it, like John Locke, who said, yeah, this stuff is terrible, but it's all we got, so yeah. But the idea behind substance is this. One of the things thinkers figured out pretty early on is that we don't encounter qualities and properties just kind of drifting on their own. So for example, if you take the water bottle, I couldn't like pull away like the color, pull away the shape, pull away the mass or volume or density or shape. We don't, you can't be walking along and bump into like silvery color. You can't be walking along and trip over, blue or a mass of 2 grams. You can trip over objects that have colors and masses, but you never encounter the stuff kind of free roaming on its own. And people wondered why. And one answer people gave was, well, there has to be something that can exist on its own, and let's call this substance. So one way to look at substance is it's an entity that can exist on its own. So the bottle, for example, you could imagine a pretty boring universe that just had this bottle floating in it. But you can't imagine a universe that just had the color of silver. Not a silver thing, just silver. And so one view of substances is there's something that can exist on their own. Also, kind of going along with this, is the idea there has to be something that the property is kind of sticking to, that supports them, upholds them, they connect to. And I always use the metaphor of Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head. And the idea, of course, is you have the plastic potato. Originally, it was a real potato. Have you ever smelled rotten potatoes? They are truly horrifyingly stinky. So if they go bad, like in your kitchen, you'll know it. You'll know it awfully. And so so what you do with Mr. Potato Head or Mrs. Potato Head is you think of that as like the substance, and you stick the various eyes and ears and things into it, and think of those as being like the property. So it's something that holds up the properties. So substance is like, generally put, like stuff. And during the time Hume was huming, there were 2 broad categories of substance. One was physical substance, which is supposed to be 3-dimensional, extended, and be material, matter. Then there's also supposed to be immaterial or spiritual substance, ghosty stuff. They're supposed to think. And on classic dualism, you have a body made of material substance, but you are your mind or soul, the ghosty, immaterial stuff. Now Hume thinks substances are like weird and stuff, but they're what everyone was talking about in that time for the most part, and so he's kind of working within that theory. So that's the setup. Substance is stuff. Now he claims, when it comes to immortality, this is something difficult to prove. What he's going to do is do an argument by elimination. And there are basically 2 types of argument by elimination. One is kind of the Sherlock Holmes method, which is you have a certain number of options, say 5. And if you know, going with the Sherlock Holmes example, if you know one of the 5 people, the 5 suspects, did it, if you eliminate 4 of them, then the one that remains has to be guilty, assuming these are the only 5 suspects and somebody among them did it. And that's an argument by elimination, where you prove by eliminating all the alternatives. Now there's also an argument by total elimination, or total destruction, where you say there are only so many options, say 3, these are the only ways to do it, and then you destroy all of those. So if those are the only ways that it could be done, but none of them can do it, it can't be done. And what Hume is doing is basically doing an argument to destruction. He says there's 3 ways to argue for immortality: metaphysical, moral, and physical. His gestures, spoiler alert, he says none of these work, and so his ultimate conclusion is not that we're definitively not immortal, but we have no reason to believe we are. He ends up in skepticism. So how does he do his stuff? Well, he begins with metaphysical arguments. And metaphysics, as you might recall from the ancient days of the past, is the branch of philosophy dealing with the nature and structure of reality, what there is, and that kind of stuff. Now, as I mentioned, he presents kind of the standard view. According to people who accept substances, there are immaterial, ghosty substances, and material substance, matter. And as he notes, people have but a confused, imperfect, blurry, distorted view of these things. And even people who really like substances often admit, yeah, it's not super clear, except Descartes, who's kind of an usual case. Now, when it comes to these substances, Hume notes that in general they're really mysterious and problematic, and the way you try to get to them is through this abstract reasoning. But the gist of it is, he doesn't really like them, and our notion of them is all fuzzy, but let's see what we can do with it, essentially. So, the first thing he does is this. He says, for the sake of the argument, let's say there are both these substances. You got the ghosty stuff, you got the material stuff. So, how does this impact the case? Well, he says, by analogy, and you might recall from the horse trader analogy that we're covering in the paper, that involves comparing stuff. And the comparison he's making here is between the spiritual substance, ghosty stuff, and material stuff. So he's going to try to say that what is true of material substance by analogy, because they're both substances, is also true of the spiritual stuff. So what is the qualities focusing on? Well, it's this. Material substance, he says, is like clay. It has a particular form for a while, and then if it's a living thing, it dies and then decays, and then it gets, shaped into something else. Or, in many cases, it gets killed by something else and then becomes part of what consumed it. Or if it's immaterial stuff, or if it's not living stuff, then it can be broken. A good example would be when humans, we dig up iron ore, we smelt it into steel and make it into stuff. So this bottle started out as ore, but now it's got a different form. And eventually someday it might get recycled, made into something else, and then that could be made into something else. So the material stuff is constantly being dissolved and reformed. And from physics, which this stuff comes a bit after Hume, we have the view that matter is neither created nor destroyed, just changes form. And that's basically what Hume is saying. Now, so he does accept that matter is effectively immortal. It can never be destroyed. But it just constantly keeps changing forms. So this bottle will cease to be a bottle at some point, but the matter that makes it up will just keep on going through radical changes. One kind of cool example is this. Every one of us has in our blood iron, and iron is only formed in supernovas. So one time, one part of you was part of a sun that exploded. True of all of us. On one hand, it's pretty cool. We're all the children of supernovas, but then everybody is, so it's not really that big of a deal. But that's where iron comes from, at least according to the science folks. So we know that matter is supposedly, immortal, it never perishes, but of course it constantly changes form. So the bottle will cease to be a bottle, the watch will cease to be a watch, the buildings will cease to be buildings. Now Hume says, by analogy, if material substances exist forever but constantly change form and lose their identity, he says the same will be true of the spiritual substance, that it too could persist forever and be immortal, but when you die, he argues, by analogy, just like when the bottle gets melted down, the metal continues, but the bottle is gone. When we die, he claims, the same would probably happen to our soul. The ghosty substance keeps on going, but we're gone. It's like what happens to the toaster after it's destroyed. Well, it's not a toaster anymore. It's just parts. Likewise, what happens to you after you die? Well, he says, yeah, the soul keeps on going, or the immaterial substance, but it's not you anymore. So even if the immaterial substance is immortal, we're not. Just like, again with the analogy, our bodies are immortal in the sense that the matter will keep on going. But are we individually immortal? Should we like jump off building and say, I'm immortal, or go fight a shark or something? Take that, Mr. Shark. Yeah, because the shark's immortal too, and he's got bigger teeth. But yeah, but we're not immortal in a useful sense in that we die, but the matter keeps on going. Possibly as part of a shark, if you get a fight or jump the shark. And so he thinks likewise with the soul. When you die, your soul kind of goes, and then gets recycled. So he claims. So kind of yucky. Now, it is an argument by analogy, so it's assessed by the usual standards. Number of similarities, relevant similarities, and relevant differences. So you could argue maybe there's a difference. Maybe souls kind of like stick together better than matter, or have some special properties, and the challenge is arguing for that. So his conclusion here basically is this. Spiritual substance, like material substance are effectively immortal, but their identity is not preserved. The stuff that makes your body keeps on going, but you don't. Likewise, the stuff that makes up your soul keeps on going, but you as a person don't. Problem. Again, he never draws a definite conclusion. He says, essentially, a skeptical view. Next argument. Now, Hume contends that if the soul is incorruptible, cannot perish, and would exist forever, he claims what follows from that is that it must have been ingenerable. In other words, it had no creation point. So his thought is, if it goes on forever, it must also have no beginning, which could be debated. The mere fact that something would go on forever doesn't mean it had no starting point. But for some reason, many of the thinkers of Hume and pre-Hume accepted that view, like Anselm, that somebody has to have a beginning and an end. If it doesn't have an end, it doesn't have a beginning, type of deal. But logically, there's no reason why something, could have a beginning but no end, or have no beginning but still end. Now, the argument he gives here is this. Roughly put, what do you remember from 1901? And the answer is, of course, nothing, because none of us were there. Again, so his view is that if the soul is truly immortal, keeping the memory and consciousness of the person intact, then we should have existed before birth. What he's talking about here is basically like reincarnation. And so you should have memories left from your previous lives. You should recall that stuff.
Are you saying like the soul of a person in 1901 transferred to us and we remember like they remember?
Yeah, because if it was you, the reasoning is if it was you, if your soul has always been around, you should remember all those past lives. Now he's always kind of skeptical about it and there's ways to respond. One is that Plato argues that we get reborn every 1,000 years, but before we come back, our memory gets erased, or scattered, just kind of scattered. And so it could be that people, religions that do have reincarnation, they have to explain like, why don't I remember this or remember that, and they'll usually say something about how you get your memory like altered or erased, or the shock of being born does something to it, and they could have a workaround. And so just because we don't remember past lives doesn't mean we definitely don't have them, for various reasons. Also, of course, Hume's assuming that we must have had previous existences, but need not be the case. Maybe God just creates souls, as people are born. So kind of like oh, soul for you, soul for you, soul for you, soul for you. Everyone gets souls. And so that would be possible as well, because you'd be a fresh soul, so you'd have no past life recollection because you had no past lives. You're not a vintage soul, you're a classy new soul. all the latest features like Wi-Fi of the soul. Now Hume also sort of goes off I guess message a bit and throws in some side points. Now he brings up animals here, not because of like the metaphysics of it, but of just, I think he probably thought of it and just threw them in there. And back then they didn't have, copy, paste, and delete and stuff, so the writing wasn't as well edited as it could be today. Although there's plenty of badly edited stuff today. Now, he notes in the case of animals that, and the reason why he makes this argument is as follows. The people he's kind of arguing against, although he doesn't mention them, they would be people who believe in immortality of the soul, but they reject that animals have immortality. And one of his main targets would be our good dead friend Descartes. And Descartes argues that animals, although alive, have no minds or souls. Now Hume argues, well, we have as much reason to think that animals have souls as people do. And Descartes actually acknowledged that. He says, yeah, we see animals moving around and making noises, and the main reason he gives as to why animals don't have souls is because they don't talk. Because things that talk have to have minds, which are souls. Things that don't talk, and I don't mean like how Alexa talks or Siri talks, or how like the old cars talk, like actual conversation. And Descartes' test for the soul was that ability to use true language, to hold on, carry on real conversations. But Hume says, hey, aside from that talking stuff, we have no reason to deny that animals have souls, so they should be immortal too. And the reason why he makes this point is to say, again, the people he's arguing against think they have souls, they're immortal, but they claim that animals don't have souls. And Hume's point is, well, we have just as much reason to think animals do, so if we have souls that are immortal, so do they. So either way, he thinks he gets a point against the people he's arguing against, because either they have to accept animals have souls and are immortal, which they don't want to do, or they have to accept that we're just as mortal as animals, which they don't want to do. So that wraps up the metaphysical arguments, and plus the animal bonus argument. Next he turns to some moral arguments, and then he also kind of gets off the track a bit. Now, one argument that was advanced before well before Hume's time for immortality is this. The idea is that the soul must be immortal because there must be reward and punishment, to balance the scales of justice. To be a little clearer about that, one thing people noticed is, if you travel around the world in the seven seas, is that good does not always triumph, and that the wicked sometimes do very well. But, according to thinkers like Aquinas, we have a passion, a desire for justice, that demands that the wicked always be brought low and punished for their misdeeds, that the good always be exalted and raised up and rewarded. And we see, much to our dismay, that the world doesn't work like that. The good are often broken and cast aside. The wicked are raised to places of power and tweet their rage at the world. Not talking about anybody in particular, because everyone has access to Twitter. Could be talking about Bob, the angry Twitter guy. So, but our thirst for justice demands final justice. And so in order to satisfy our desire for final justice, there must be an afterlife in which the books are balanced. So we can know, hopefully, that even if someone is wicked, triumphs in this world, and escapes justice here, that they'll pay for their sins in the afterlife. And then if someone good is, murdered here, at a young age, that in the kingdom of heaven they shall be rewarded for all their goodness. We want that. Now, and that is often taken as an argument for immortality. For there to be true justice, there has to be immortality, where the wicked get tossed into hell, and the good go to heaven. Now, Hume says, yeah, that's not going to work. Why? Well, all we really got to go with, of course, is this universe. We don't have access to heaven and hell. We don't get reports. You don't get like on Fox News, today in hell, the following people have arrived, or heaven, etc. Now, one thing he does note, and this is kind of a bit of an ad hominem in a way, but perhaps a relevant one, is this. He notes that the people who present this idea of an afterlife in which people are punished, thrown into hell, they often gather a lot of riches here in this life. They're very concerned about it. So their behavior doesn't seem to match their preaching, because if there's this great and wonderful afterlife which rewards you for being good, why are they so concerned about the stuff here? This stuff wouldn't matter. Now, some later thinkers made an even more, in a way, savage argument, which would be, if you really believe in a great afterlife, why are you here? Why not just it's terrible. I mean, it's terrible in the sense of it's a really awful thing to say, but to use an analogy, if you came across someone like living in a shack in the swamp, and there was like a wall with a mysterious door in it beside them, and you say, hey, swamp person, what's behind the door? And they say it is a beautiful mansion, with 100 rooms and Wi-Fi and AC and stuff. You're like, so why are in the shack in the swamps? And the person says, well, I must stay here until the day in which I am allowed to pass through the door. It's like, I just open the door right now. Get out of the swamp, get away from the snakes and the ticks and leeches. Why not just go there now? And the person says, no, I gotta wait. It's like, well, why? And so if there's something vastly better than our life, why do we stick around here? And of course, the critic says we don't really believe in a sweet afterlife, because if we did, we'd kill ourselves as quickly as possible. Which in a way is terrifying, but makes sense. Now, Hume's argument, his version of it, is that the people who really push this fear of an afterlife and damnation and so forth, they often do this to get riches and power here. And I'm thinking of the televangelist doors asking people for tons of money. And so if they really believed, they wouldn't be so concerned with stacking up cash here, because it really wouldn't matter. Now, that, of course, to say to someone, they say there's an afterlife in which you get this great reward for being good, punishments for being evil, but they act like it's life here that matters, because they're busy, telling their followers to send them money to buy a private jet, to have gold, toilets and so forth. And if they really believed in an afterlife and with justice, they wouldn't be doing that stuff. They'd be behaving good, wouldn't be so worried about the money. Therefore, they're wrong. Now, on one hand, of course, that's a mere ad hominem. An ad hominem is a fallacy in which somebody attacks a person's qualities who's making the claim and says, aha, they have bad qualities, so their claim is false. But the qualities of a person, no matter how bad or wicked or evil they are, doesn't make their claim true or false. For example, if someone says, yeah, Hitler was a terrible person, but he believed 2 + 2 is 4, so he's wrong. 2 + 2 can't be 4. And that, of course, is stupid. People would see right through that. But other ad hominems are much more appealing. Someone attacks someone that they don't like, and they say, yeah, their claim must be false. If someone says, for example, yeah, that person is just a socialist, and they claim that free college for students would be a good idea, but they got to be wrong because they're commies. That can be much appealing to some, but it's still just an ad hominem. So attacking the people who make the claim doesn't disprove the claim. But of course, on the other hand, this could be seen as relevant, because of the people who claim to know act like what they believe is totally not true, you might start being suspicious. I mean, for example, suppose you go talk, suppose you're starting to plan your retirement, which you should be doing. Apparently you're supposed to start planning your retirement at age 2, or otherwise you're doomed. Oh, too late. You haven't started planning. And suppose you go to talk to your stockbroker, or whoever, your retirement planner, And they say, oh yeah, put all your money in this, this is a sure win. And then as you walk out, and you overhear a conversation they have saying, don't put any of my money into that stupid, thing, that's a total loser. Well, if they don't believe what they're telling you, and they're supposed to know, you might suspect they're up to something. Doesn't prove that it's not a good idea, but it's pretty good reasoning to think if they know and they're doing the opposite of what they should be doing if it was true, then you have grounds to think, yeah, they're probably up to something. Now again, it doesn't disprove it, because the mere fact they're not living what they preach doesn't prove their claim is false, but it gives grounds for suspicion. And of course, to be fair to people who, preach about stuff, there are people, you rarely hear about them because they don't typically get on the news or get a lot of attention or appear on the cover of magazines, who do live the life. They preach, justice and, goodness, and don't, ask people for money to buy a private jet. But that's kind of boring. The person who asks for money for a private jet and is on TV all the time gets the attention. The person who doesn't. Now he brings up animals again. He's really hung up on the crickets. And again, the main reason is people he's arguing against, like Descartes, they were really focused on saying animals don't have souls or minds. And one of the reasons, of course, is so people can keep eating animals. Although vegetarianism and veganism is often seen as a very modern phenomena, like something that came out of California in the 60s, it's actually ancient. It goes back at least to Pythagoras. He was an ancient Greek before Socrates, and he argued that you shouldn't eat animals because of reincarnation. Because an animal reincarnated could be like a relative of yours, so you shouldn't eat them. And throughout history, people have actually been kind of worried about eating animals, because if they do have souls, then killing them would be kind of wrong. And the Bible, of course, says, "Thou shalt not kill." And thinkers like Augustine and Aquinas were worried about that. They wondered, if you kill animals and plants, is that going to send you to hell? Because the Bible says, don't be killing. But don't worry, they said it's cool. Because their argument is the animals are inferior to us, so we can eat them. Now, Hume says, again with the animals, well, by parity of reasoning, he says, we're like animals. Animals supposedly were mortal, so by the same reasoning, we should be mortal too, no survivor. Or alternatively, if we are immortal, animals are like us, they should be immortal too. And Hume thinks that's, a clever argument, because either argument sticks to the people he wants to stick it to. Because if they say, okay, animals have souls, they don't want to say that. And if they say we're mortal, they don't want to say that either. So either argument, is bad for them. Now he then sidetracks again with women. Nothing to do with the moral argument, but just brings it in as a kind of like an additional argument that has nothing to do with the moral argument. So I'm sure if someone was like grading his paper, they would say, move this to another section because this doesn't fit. Not that it's a bad argument, but it doesn't really fit here. Now, what he's trying to do here is, again, argue against a particular sort of view. In many religions, women are, as a matter of practice, seen as inferior to men. And people will cite particular scriptures, to justify that, and ignore other scripture that doesn't justify that conveniently enough. Now, so Hume is arguing against that. So, if someone argues, well, women are inferior to men, and there's an immortal soul, Hume says, well, that doesn't make any sense, because we're only on Earth for a pretty short time. Average about, 70 years. Actually, life expectancy is dropping in the U.S. So, yeah, sad. So I'm not getting any younger. Gotta keep that expectancy up there. Now, so if we're only here a short time, and we exist for infinity and the afterlife, then there shouldn't be any difference in the souls of men or women, because the time we spend here is super, super short, and the afterlife is going to be infinitely long. So the supposed inferiority of woman doesn't make any sense. Also, the soul is, not the body, so there should not be like, differences, and they can't be like, they could be the soul that was once a soul of a woman or a man, but they don't retain the body in the afterlife. So Hume's argument is, well, two options. One is, if we do have souls, then men and women should be equal. So stop oppressing women, roughly. If we don't have souls, then there's no immortality. So religion is and the religion is mistaken. And for him, either option is good for him and bad for his opponents. Then he gets back on track. Now, probably the best argument here is this one. Now, he's following Leibniz's view here. Not explicitly, he doesn't do any footnotes or anything. But if we accept, as Leibniz reasoned, that there's got to be like this first cause that makes everything happen. Now, one unfortunate side effect of that is that every event that occurs is caused by God. So that means that nothing could be different. To use an analogy that Hume does not do, because they have too much class. Imagine you get someone playing with a G.I. Joe action figure, a Ken doll, because he can't be an action figure because he's Ken, and Barbie. I guess he should be an action figure, but Ken, he's going to be a doll. Just sorry, Ken. And so, the person picks up Barbie and G.I. Joe and says, Barbie says, oh, Ken's such a terrible person. G.I. Joe's like, hey baby, and they're like making out. And then Ken catches them, I can't believe you're cheating on me. And then the person says, and then God grabs them and throws them in the fire, poof, throws them on the barbecue. Now, G.I. Joe and Barbie deserve to be fired on the barbecue. Well, no, because they're just plastic. They don't do it, Who was making them do all these stuff? Well, the person playing the game. They're in total control. Why does G.I. Joe and Barbie have the affair? Well, I guess Ken is terrible, but that sweater vest, or the little sweater he wore. But no, it's because he's making it happen. And so if he punishes them, that's stupid. It'd be like someone, use another metaphor, someone grabbing someone's hand and like punching someone else in the face, saying, why are you punching that person? I'm gonna have to like report you to the police for punching that person. And of course, they're not. If they're making the person punch the person, that person's not responsible. They're just the victim. So if Hume is right, and God makes everything happen, then there's nobody to punish except him. Because the people doing what they do, they have no choice. They could not do otherwise. And to punish people for doing things they have no control whatsoever over would be wrong. To use another analogy, if someone was tripped and falls off a building and falls on somebody and hurts both of them, we wouldn't like arrest that person for assault because there's nothing they can do. Gravity's in control. So Hume says this idea of there being an afterlife to punish people, if God makes everything happen, doesn't make any sense. It would be punishment without any purpose at all. Now, there are ways around it. You could argue that, as people often do, that God doesn't make everything happen. God allows us free choice. And so he just knows what we're going to do, but we do it of our free will, and so we do bad, so he has the right to punish us. And so you could take that with life. Now, another argument he gives, which is an interesting one, is the notion of proportion in punishment. Now, one popular notion, at least amongst moral philosophers, is that punishments should be proportional to the crime. The main argument for this is, well, if the punishment is like way worse than the crime, then it's actually creating like more crime in a way, you know, because if someone like steals a piece of bread and someone like takes the person and tortures them for 10 days and then kills them, you'd say, well, I guess you punished them, but those are worse. Torture and murder are far worse crimes than, you know, theft of a slice of bread. Now, so if we accept that notion that punishment should be proportional, that the punishment should match, you know, the crime, then we get punishment that's way out of proportion. Because the system, at least as often presented, is strictly, you know, bipolar. Heaven, perfect reward; hell, perfect damnation. They also, there's some talk of like purgatory, kind of unofficial, but that's where you're kind of like the middle ground. You can kind of, I guess, work off your sins or something. But the typical view is, you know, strict heaven, hell. And the problem is that if everyone gets like thrown to hell, no matter how bad they weren't infinitely bad. And hell is supposed to be infinitely bad for an infinite amount of time. So it's this, you know, it's infinitely bad. Which is, no matter how bad a person was, no matter how long they lived, they could not commit an infinite amount of evil for an infinite amount of time. So even if they did the worst crimes imaginable over the course of a lifetime, you know, started evil like at age 2, when they should have been investing in retirement, and just you know, worked hard at being evil, they would still only have a finite amount of time. They couldn't do an infinite amount of evil in an infinite amount of time. So the punishment would always exceed the crime. And that would seem to be unjust. Now, as you might imagine, people who believe in infinite hell were aware of, you know, this kind of criticism. And one interesting reply was put forth by Jonathan Edwards, not the presidential candidate who was cheating on his wife while she had cancer. So that's why I wasn't president. That's why I never heard of President Edwards, because back in those days, being a bad person, or being known to be a bad person, was kind of disqualifying for president. So, actually, even crime, even crying you should disqualify for president. Edmund Muskie from my state of Maine, he was the Secretary of State, and people were saying terrible things about his wife that weren't true, and he actually shed a tear because he loved his wife, and he was punished for being a human with emotions. Because one thing we can't stand is people with genuine emotions who love their wife. Adultery is cool, but caring about your wife, that's out. Maybe Bill Clinton, he kept getting reelected. So much adultery. For real, we don't even know how much. Not an infinite amount, but a whole bunch. So even he wouldn't deserve hell because he didn't commit an infinite adultery for infinite time. Although it could be one of his dreams. Anyways. So Jonathan Edwards said in his classic sermon, "Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God," he said that any crime against God is infinitely bad because God is infinitely good. So no matter how small the crime is, they're all equally infinitely bad. Therefore, everyone deserves hell. So he believed in predestination. You were preset. You had your ticket already to heaven or hell the moment you came into existence. You didn't know what was on your ticket, though. It's kind of like in your pocket, you can't look at it. Now, so people didn't live in total fear. They did say that if you were wealthy and successful, you were probably among the elect. You're probably going to heaven. And if you were poor, you were probably damned. And this had a huge impact in the United States, because if you ever wonder, like, why do Americans hate poor people so much, even when poor people don't deserve their poverty? And one reason is this religious view, that the people who are poor are damned. God has already pre-damned them to hell, and so they're terrible people. You know, this is baked into it. And even people who aren't like particularly religious, that's still in the subconscious. The idea that the rich are the chosen of God and the poor are damned. So thank you, colonial American religion. And so on that view, infinite punishment would be justified because any crime against God would be infinitely bad. Now, of course, one implication is that if you're going to commit any crime, you might as well just go for it, because the sentencing is always the same. And you're already pre-saved or pre-damned, so why not? You know, just do whatever, because no matter what you do, you know, the result, you already your ticket. You're going one way or the other. Nothing you can do can change that ticket. Probably. That's probably something people didn't realize, preaching that, just like, go for it. And interestingly, one of the most terrifying parts of it is that the people who got heaven didn't deserve it. I mean, that was the view. You didn't deserve heaven. But instead of the people in heaven, you know, pitying the people who didn't make it, and feeling sorry for them, like, you know, like after, like a shipwreck or like the hurricane we had, the people who were hurt, and you know, those of us who got through, you know, unkilled, we look at the people who were worse off and we feel sorry for them, because it's all just pure luck. You know, the tree hit their house and not yours. But Edward says the people in heaven should look down at the sinners, and the smell of their roasting damnation should please them and make heaven all the better. Which is weird, because no one deserves their fate. So it'd be like looking over your neighbor and saying, ah yes, the tree crushed their whole house. I feel even better about my luck. And that's just psychotically evil. Now, lest you get a terrible view of Jonathan Edwards, he was actually a pretty good person otherwise. In fact, he died and part of the process of developing vaccines against smallpox. So much better than what he was saying in the pulpit. So actually a pretty good guy who said some pretty crazy stuff, or maybe true stuff. Now Hume also, to wrap up, he also lays out the concern that we have that there being this heaven and hell, we don't seem to encounter people who are utterly pure good or pure evil. Most people are a mix of, you know, good and bad. So it's kind of weird to have a totally binary system. And we generally favor some of us do, favor some lenience and punishment, or it could be wrong about that. Now he brings up one final, you know, point of great concern, which is what happens to the infants, or people who die before they're even born. You got to go one way or the other, but they haven't done anything. So how does that work? Now again, there are ways to answer all these concerns. One answer to the infancy problem was limbo. The idea, if you ever heard the term limbo, you might sometimes hear, like, and you say, like, oh, where's your paperwork? Oh, it's in limbo. We're never going to see that. But it's a place where the souls of unbaptized children went to. It wasn't as bad as hell, but not as good as heaven. You just kind of hang out there forever. I think it's called New Jersey. No, New Jersey's hell, sorry. It's like the state that's better than New Jersey, but not as good as Maine. Okay, so next time, Wednesday, of course, no class because of the ALEC meeting.